Today I'm speaking with Annette Marinaccio. Annette is a left-brained accountant who delved in to see if there was any evidence of an afterlife. Like me, she was pretty shocked by what she found, which, also like me, prompted her to volunteer for Forever Family Foundation and to write a book on this topic called Your Sole Focus, You Believe in the Afterlife, Don't You? So listen in for a fun conversation. I want to give everyone a note about this video. I got a lot of feedback that you would like to see all my episodes in video. So I'm going back and adding old content into videos. So this is one of my much earlier episodes. At the time of recording some of these earlier episodes, I had no intention of ever publishing videos. So please know I'm putting together as good quality as possible with the content I created at the time. For this one, I don't have myself on video. So you'll see the video of the guest, Annette Marinaccio, and I mix that in with a screen holder for when I'm speaking. I know that's not ideal, but it's the best I can do with content I recorded a few years ago when I was just starting out. I hope you still enjoy the video and it'll be fun for you to get to see Annette. She's such an interesting person and we have a really great conversation. Welcome to What the Fuck Just Happened? I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listened to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey-skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I'll be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird shit. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the fuck just happened? Hey guys, I'm talking to my friend Annette today, Annette Marinaccio, and she is a volunteer with me at the Forever Family Foundation. She wrote a book called Your Sole Focus about the afterlife and afterlife evidence, and she is a fellow left-brainer, super logical-minded person. She's even an accountant, so she might even be more left-brain than me. So we have definitely bonded about this, and she still thinks there's evidence of an afterlife. So hopefully that can give you guys some hope. It definitely gives me hope when I meet other left-brainers who assess all the evidence the same way I do. So Annette can introduce herself and take it from here, and then we'll begin our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And yes, my name is Annette Marinaccio, and I'm a certified public accountant, so I'm definitely very deeply set in the I think they call it the 2D world, the left brain world. And I had, I can't really say that I was skeptical about an afterlife, but I really had not thought about it. I was very busy, living my life and, working and, my family life. I'm married with two children, two adult children now. But so I was very busy with all that and had not really thought about the afterlife until my mother-in-law died, which was in 2006. And after she died, she was very intent on proving to me that she was actually still here. And so once I started, I guess, accepting and understanding the signs and synchronicities that she was sending my way, then I became absolutely engrossed and fascinated and almost obsessed with it, and needed to really understand, basically, if life goes on, then what exactly are we doing here? So I spent, like, I would say 3 years, 4 years, just researching everything I could metaphysical. And that's where I connected with the Forever Family Foundation. And their mission, our mission, is to scientifically prove that there's an afterlife. So they were wonderful, like-minded people, which helped my growth in that, along that vein. And after probably about 4 years of really what I would say intense research for me, I felt I had a handle on it. I was like, something, I know what the afterlife's about. I sort of understand a lot of what's going on here. And I was satisfied and sort of done and volunteering my time to Forever Family and, those kinds of things. But as the universe would have it, and as the universe often does, I was placed in the path of people who needed tidbits of my knowledge at the time they needed it. And I was like, geez, this is sort of fascinating, And that's what made me sort of at some point say, I have to just consolidate everything I know into a book and circulate it that way. And that's what I did this year with Your Soul Focus, actually 2021, with Your Soul Focus.
So I'm going to back up and ask you a lot of questions about everything you just said. So first of all, you said the first time you started to really think about an afterlife was your mother-in-law passed away and gave you signs. What was the very first thing she did that made you think, wait, what is that?
So, and I can't say it's one particular thing. It was a series. But what happened was about 5 days after we buried her, my 13-year-old daughter and I were having breakfast at the table before she went to school and before I went to work. And she said to me in a very matter-of-fact way, and we were not a family to ever really speak about, death or afterlife, that kind of thing. She said, guess what? I got a sign from Grandma Lucille. That's my mother-in-law's name, Grandma Lucille, yesterday. And I was like, what? So that was, I guess, the first thing, right? And then she proceeded to tell me that she was in art class making a 3D card, and she had a container of pom-poms from the art closet, and she had decided to make a green and red pom-pom card. So she counted 11 green and 11 red. I don't know why 11, but she counted them and double-checked them. And even now, as an adult, she's very detail-oriented. So it would be just like her to sort of double-check. So she double-counted and everything, and then went back to put the pom-poms away and came back to her desk and found 11 green, 11 red, 1 lavender, and 1 ivory. And she said, so Grandma must have placed the lavender and the ivory one there. And I was like, how and why? And she said, well, they're the exact colors of the balloons that we let go at the gravesite. And so I think she's thanking me for the balloons. And I was like, thinking to myself, I wonder if she's really having a very difficult time with this death and is hallucinating these pom-poms. But then she continued, but I didn't say that, and I didn't let that on because I was a little concerned. And she continued. She said, do you want to see them? And I was like, okay, now it's getting more fascinating. She runs up in her bedroom, and she comes down, sure enough, with 2 pom-poms, lavender and ivory, the exact colors of the balloons we let go at the gravesite. And so now I was just like, now this is really weird so I said to her, how did they get there? And she played all the scenarios over in her head. She's also very left-brained. And she said, well, they must have either appeared or floated through the air, but nobody was around my desk, so I know nobody put them there. I know I didn't put them there. I know they didn't fall out. She had discounted all the possibilities that you would normally think of. And so I was a little bit fascinated by that, but just tucked it in the back of my mind. But I was telling a lot of friends and family about it. And so the combination was that story. And then about a week later, I was speaking to a very dear friend of mine. She's still a dear friend of mine. And she we had just never spoken about the afterlife. We just had never come up. But I told her the pom-pom story, and she, in a very matter-of-fact way, said, Annette, you believe in the afterlife, don't you? And that's the subtitle of my book, because I was that line really led me on the path, because now I had the story from my daughter, and then a dear friend who was very matter-of-fact about the afterlife, which I am now, very matter-of-fact about it, but she was then. Then I was like, what? You believe in the afterlife? And she's like, of course there's an afterlife. And so that combination was the first opening of my eyes.
Wow. And do you know why this friend is so confident about an afterlife? Did she share experiences, or she just always thought that?
So it's interesting. She said that she's always thought that, but she had specific signs after her dad died. Her dad died relatively early in life. And she actually told me she frequents a medium on Long Island, Josephine Girangeli, who's in my book. She frequents her to tap into her father, to tap into Maria's father, to get advice. Like, I'm thinking of naming my son X. Mom wants to move out of the house now. Do you think now's the right time, or should we wait? So she has life conversations with her deceased father through this medium. So that's her. So she was telling me these stories, and I was like, oh my goodness, like, I was just so shocked. But again, the way the universe just strings up these synchronicities, probably about a week after that, my husband and myself and my son and my recently widowed father-in-law went out to a restaurant just on Main Street in our town. And we were placed at a table next to a window. And on the window was this large poster that was the size of the window. And it was facing the street, so we were behind it. But we could see that it said dinner and show with Josephine G., the exact medium that my girlfriend had just told me about. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, again, So, but again, it was my mother-in-law just weaving the path for me. And so I went home, called my girlfriend up, said, do you want to go to this show? It was in 3 months. She said yes. So we ended up going to this event, this Josephine G. event. And at that event, my mother-in-law came through, insistent on coming through. The first time Josephine came over to me with evidence of my mother-in-law, you typically take the microphone and speak. I froze. I did not take the microphone. I just totally frozen. And so Josephine went and read somebody else, but my mother-in-law wouldn't give up. And so this was now April of 2007, and she died October of 2006. She said, I have Lucille here. Now, Lucille was my mother-in-law's name. So she said, I have Lucille here. She's got very dark hair, which my mother-in-law had. And I was busy in my head playing through, okay, I made the reservations. How my girlfriend rat me out. I don't understand. Like, I was playing everything in my head. Did I pay already? Does she have my credit card? And I made the reservations, a net party of 3. We had another friend come too. And they had no payment information or anything.
And they didn't have your last name.
Just a net party of 3. So that's why I was just, when she said, I have Lucille here, that's pretty evidential. That's my mother-in-law's name. She's got dark black hair, which she did. And she's holding her stomach like she died of stomach cancer. My mother-in-law died of pancreatic. And so I didn't take the microphone. I was petrified. And so she said, and my girlfriend's kicking me under the table. That's your mother-in-law. Take the microphone. I was like, no way. And then she basically said, all right, if it's not Lucille, it's somebody with an L maybe. And then the woman behind our table raised her hand and said, my name's Elizabeth. And then Josephine went over to her and proceeded to read her with stuff that pertained to me. So she said, oh, okay, if this is for you, Elizabeth, are you going to Italy in a couple of months? And Elizabeth was like, no, I just came back from Florida. Meanwhile, I booked Italy for a couple of months from then. So she was like, it was like my stuff, And Then she went and read somebody else and came back to our table and said, okay, this woman is still here. She's not going away. She's holding her stomach. She's saying it's Lucille, something with an L, holding her stomach like she died of, maybe it's not stomach cancer, but something like it. And this time I raised my hand. So, and then more evidential stuff. And that was enough for me at the end of that evening. It was enough for me to say, all right, this is too unbelievable. Even as an accountant, I can't just process this away. I mean, the pom-poms, to Maria telling me about Josephine, to going out to dinner to a place where she was going to be in 3 months, to her coming through with my mother-in-law, and eventually she came through with my mother's name, which was Rita. There's something going on here that I need to understand. That was my initial chain.
I mean, that's all pretty. I mean, it's pretty inexplicable. Like, you can't, especially knowing you and knowing that you would go through in a logical, sensible way all the normal explanations, and then they're just not there. And I trust your daughter is probably like you in that sense, and you're saying she's meticulous. And I trust that you had an intelligent left brain assessment, and it just comes down to, how do you explain this? I mean, both of those. And I know there's more details you added in your book, which, don't need to go into here because I definitely think people should read it. But I'm curious. So then what was the next thing you did after that experience?
Yeah, that was, you're right. I just kept thinking through all the possibilities. And again, I went into it thinking that it would be a little bit almost like a magic show. So I was shocked, but my mother-in-law was very insistent, and to the point where I didn't raise my hand and she came back again. So that I attribute to my mother-in-law sort of opening my eyes to this. But when I drove home that evening, which was relatively late, it was a Sunday evening, April 2007, I woke my husband up and I was like, you're never going to believe this. And I went through everything. And so that was the very first next thing I did, was try and, like a sounding board, think, is he going to tell me I'm absolutely nuts? Or, he's also an accountant. And so, and he was fascinated. So then I started, like I said, for 3 or 4 years, I read everything I could metaphysical. I went to medium shows. I went to metaphysical workshops. I went to psychic workshops to develop my own psychic ability, which I will say I'm not that good at, although people, since I've written the book, have said, I think the universe is just sort of, tapping into your abilities in a different way. So I don't have maybe a traditional psychic sense, but I do have some kind of sense, I guess. I'll tell you a story about, interesting current story about that I'm just like, I love. But anyway, so the very next thing is I started dragging family and friends to all kinds of events, just different readings and just anything I could get my hands around and head around and drive to. I basically spent 3 or 4 years just researching it as best I can and opening it up for different friends and family members, I would say. That's what I did. This happened the other day, and I just in terms of psychic sense or whatever, which I don't like to think I have. I don't think I have. Like, I meditate and I want to try and see the other side, and I don't have any of that ability. My left brain is so strong. But I'll tell you this story that just happened that I just think, wow, there's something to this. So I work in an office building in Manhasset, New York. It's 4 levels, and in the main level where you walk in, there's security desk. And so they sit there with panels of TVs sort of watching, just the hallways and the elevator, make sure people don't get, stuck in an elevator or whatever. And the same woman security guard is there for, I go in there 6 years. And before COVID, it would be every day I'd go in, but now we sort of go in like twice a week, 3 times a week. Every time I walk in, I say, hello, she says, hello, and that's it. I don't know her name, anything. And there's always different security people there on the way out, but she's usually the morning person. And for the last 2 months, so this is, I'm going to say it started like October of 2021, when I would go in, I really want to give her a copy of my book as a gift. I just want to. And I have no idea why. I don't know her name. It's the strangest topic, the afterlife. I don't know if she's spiritual at all, but I think I want to give it to her because she's in a job where you're sitting, watching these cameras, and I'm thinking that's got to be the kind of personality that would also like to read a book because you have the time. But then again, she's working. She can't read a book while she's working. So I don't know. But I've been every day I pass her on the 2 or 3 days I've been going in, and I'm thinking I have to just ask her if she's a reader and would like a book with my mask on. I'm walking in, and every day I just pass her, hello, hello, and I don't bring it up because I'm not brave enough to bring it up. And the day after Christmas, like, that Monday, let's say the 27th or something like that, I went into work again. And this day, as I'm driving into work, so this was just like last week, I'm playing in my head, if that woman is there, it's holiday time, it's the time of giving, I have to give her my book. And so I'm going to have to be brave enough to broach the topic. And it's such a weird topic. It's just, but I kept saying, I have to do it. I have to do it. And I was just convincing myself to do it. I walk into the building that morning. She's there. She says hello in her cheery voice. I say hello, and I pass her and go to the elevators because I'm not brave enough to bring it up. And then I back up. I actually walk back, and I say to her, I don't know why I'm pulled to ask you this, but are you a spiritual person? And do you like to read books? And she stands up from her desk and she says, I do like to read books. And she said, and what was your other question? I said, are you a spiritual person? And she said, I'm trying to be. My mother died on December 9th, and we just buried her December 24th. And so I was like, what? Just now? You just buried her? Just this December? And she said, yeah, last week. And then as she stood up, I could see her under her mask. Her eyes were all puffy and swollen. And she said, I'm trying to stay positive. It's just very, very difficult now. And I was like, oh my gosh, I definitely have to get you my book. So I said, as a gift, I didn't want her to think I was like trying to sell her a book. So I ran it to my car, got a book out of my trunk of the car, came back in. I handed her the book and I said, I thought this was a gift from me, but I think it's a gift from your mother. And I handed her the book. She hugged the book. And the book is like, it's a nice color, the blue. And so she hugged the book like this. And she said, I can't wait to start reading this tonight. She said, thank you so much. And I said, I can't believe. I said, I'm so sorry for your loss. And then as I'm walking away, I was like, what's your name? I still didn't even know her. And she said, my name was Evie. And I was like, oh, nice to meet you. My name's Annette. I'm a vice president upstairs, which is the truth. I'm just a worker upstairs, but I happen to have written this book this year. And she was like, I just can't wait to start reading this tonight. So I'm actually looking forward to going back in the office and seeing if she enjoyed the book. I said, well, enjoy it. But afterwards, I got goosebumps. I was like on cloud 9 for the longest time. I still am. Because obviously I don't think I have psychic ability, like traditional psychic ability, but I actually use the words, I've been pulled to ask you these questions, the same way a medium would say, I'm pulled or drawn to you. It was this exact same experience. Like I just was working up the bravery to ask her those out of not non-normal questions. And when I did, they turned out to be so valuable to her at this point in her life. So yeah, that's my current story to show you how, it's interesting how the universe works.
I feel like, because I've had a few, as you probably know, like experiences where I've gotten psychic or medium information, and there seems to be some way where people who don't have abilities overall, will suddenly have these moments where when they're really seeking to understand if there could be something to this, it'll happen every once in a while, not with the consistency it does with mediums, but when there's like a desperation or a point, or, I know for me, which I've talked about the details some other times to all the listeners, it's also in my book, but there was this time where I was just doing cold reading kind of as a joke, I was challenged to do it, like do a fake reading as a joke at a Forever Family event. And I got all this real information and it physically felt different. And I mean, I can't do that any other time. I can't do it on call. It's happened a few times, but for me, that opened, this was when I was still very early and still very skeptical. And it opened me up to understand the next level and to trust the mediums at the next level, and allowed me to research the next level. So it's like when it has this big purpose, and that's so cool. And her mom must have just been like, give this to my daughter, give this. I'm finally learning how to get through to your brain. Who knows what mediums have. I assume they'll probably find some biological brain structure. I'm sure it's a physical thing.
Yes, I would think so too. It's got to be something with the brain, like a different area of the brain is larger or activated or something like that. But yeah, it has to be a whole drive in to work that day. It was like a half-hour drive. I was just trying to get up the bravery to say something to her. I kept saying, if she's there, I'm going to do it. Today is the day. But I've been playing this over for the last 2 months when I drive in. But that day, I actually passed her and then went back to do it. So I know her mother was just shaking me as best she could. And it's interesting that you mentioned about how these kinds of occasions come and go for people that aren't traditionally psychic. And I think you're right. I think they come when you're in a position to learn something else, or in a position to share something with someone, to just help them on their journey. Because it's interesting. One of my girlfriends, after I wrote the book, she said to me, geez, your mother-in-law must have been such a strong individual. And I was like, she was strong, but I don't know that she was so much stronger than anybody else. And she said, well, you two must have had such a strong relationship. And I was like, we did. We had a very great, loving relationship. But, again, I don't know that it would be that different than any other loving relationship. And then she said, but then why did she pick you to come through to? And I was like, I don't know. And it always fascinated me that once my mother-in-law started that journey for me, and she enlisted my spirit guides, and she enlisted other deceased relatives on that side, they gave me morsels of information at times when they knew I was ready to receive them and digest them. They didn't just flood me. It was like a little bit at a time, another thing. And every time they gave me something, it was with a distinct purpose to learn something else, another facet. And so then my girlfriend said to me, wait a minute, I know why your mother-in-law chose you, because she knew you'd write the book. She knew you'd put your pen to paper and actually put something down in writing and help people. And I was like, something, I think that's true. I think we're given, especially people who aren't traditionally psychic, we're given tidbits of information or waves of information at the right time for us to make sure that we share it with others, or just at the right time for our own knowledge, so that we incorporate it within ourselves, so that we're in a position to share it later on with somebody. I think there's always a purpose to why we're getting something.
I guess there are two things that I sort of relate to in what you said. One is I just find it so interesting that I knew exactly what to Google and the exact book to read that gave me a chance to consider this, because there's so many books. I don't even want to say they're nonsense, but they're a lot more of a spiritual tone, and they're easier to find. They have better, higher rankings. I should have found them first, but they're just not as logical, science-based as my first book was by, well, first it was a book on Einstein and time travel, but the other very first book about all of this was Dr. Jim Tucker.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Who is a child psychiatrist who researches cases of kids with past life memories. And that isn't the first thing that would show up in Google ranks normally about whether someone who wants to learn more about past lives or reincarnation. And that was the very first thing I found, and it showed up on the top. And I just found it so interesting. And then I remember I had a psychic medium reading early on, and I was going to so many different ones. And then I want to actually hear more about your experiences. But I thought of this story was she actually was not a good medium. She was not getting anything accurate about my father. And heads up, she was not part of Forever Family. But I sensed she was genuine. She wasn't trying to cheat. She wasn't trying to make things fit. When I kept saying no, she just was like, I'm sorry, I don't know. This is all I'm getting. And then if I could guess now, looking back, she was actually a psychic and not a medium. And not, there's a line, all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. And some who aren't as well trained can't tell the difference. But what was interesting, and I was dismissing this, I was like, this is the worst reading I ever had. She was like, I see you doing stuff related to all of this. And I was like, are you crazy? I really believe this. No. And I was like, okay, just listening. And she was like, you're going to be teaching your mother, which I since have, but we definitely don't have the mother-daughter relationship where I'm like the mother role. Like she's very like caretaking of me and educated and very much the mother role. So I was like, what is she talking about? She's like, you're so much more advanced than her. You're going to be doing stuff with spirituality and mediumship. And she's like, but I don't think you have abilities. She's like, I can't quite figure out what you're going to be doing. I see you standing in front of people and speaking about this. She's like, I just don't get why this is coming through. And I was like, this is such bullshit. Now here I am. So, and I re-listened to it, not remembering she'd even said that. And I was like, what the fuck? That's crazy. This was actually a really good psychic reading.
Yeah, that was a psychic reading for sure.
Yeah. And way before, she couldn't have even been reading my mind because this was like my 5th reading, like a month and a half into like when I started getting readings. There was just, so I thought that was really interesting. Hey, everyone. I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@WTFJustHappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. Back up a little to the path you were on. So you said after this, you started delving in. You started taking classes. You started going to other readings. What was your experience with that? Did you find most of the mediums were good? Was there a lot of nonsense?
Well, it's interesting because I would say all the mediums I went to were really good. First of all, I connected with Forever Family relatively early on, like 2007. So right at the beginning of me trying to learn everything. So a lot of the medium events were their events. And they have great mediums. So that was, they were really good. And then, so I don't think any of the mediums that I went to were not good mediums, but on many occasions, they would not read something accurately of me. Like they would give me a sign and I'd be like, just like you're saying, like, no, that doesn't ring, that doesn't ring, that doesn't ring. But in many cases, it's because I didn't know what they were even referring to. So I'll give you an example. I went to another medium, Robert Hanson, who's also in my book. And I was there in a gallery setting group of 50 people. And I wasn't going to one-on-one medium readings because I wasn't looking for anything in particular to be read myself. I was more trying to understand how it all works. So it was helpful to me to be in group settings, even if I wasn't read, because I would see the dynamic and see how the different mediums worked. And I was really more interested in just learning, not in getting a reading. But I was at this group, and I was with a girlfriend. I was sort of turning her on to this whole thing for the first time. We went to Robert Hansen. It was a group of 50 people, and he happened to read me. My mother-in-law came through, Lucille. He brought up my husband's name, Ralph, and Dom. He had a lot of great hits. But then at one point he was saying, I am seeing a Lionel train set. It was January of a particular year, probably 2008. And he asked about the holidays. Do you put trains around a Christmas tree or something at the holidays? I'm seeing like a train set. And I was like, no. And he said, what about when you were growing up? Did you have trains when you were growing up around the Christmas tree or anything? No. Did you make a Christmas village with a train going around? I'm seeing, and he kept up and up and up. And I always found it fascinating. Like I always felt that you can really tell I think a good medium when they keep insisting on something and there's a group of people and they're clearly wrong. It's like, why are they insisting? They're probably really insisting because they're getting some information and they're really trying to, have it make sense to them and to the reader. So he kept going and going, and I kept thinking to myself, geez, I wish he would stop this because it's obviously not accurate. But anyway, he kept it up and he said, well, I'm seeing a Lionel train set. Did you ever go on a steam engine vacation with your mother-in-law? And I was like, no, we didn't go on any steam engine vacation. I was on we took the kids to a steam engine at one point. My mother-in-law wasn't there. A train, no. So everything was no. And he goes, well, what I'm seeing is a man holding a Lionel train in his hand. So I think there's some, trains in your house or something like that. And I was like, no. We actually drove home that evening with my girlfriend, and I said and she was fascinated. She was like, oh my God, because there was so many hits. He had my mother-in-law's name, Lucille. He said, who's Ralph, which is my husband's name. He said, I'm seeing Dom. Is Dom related to them? Dom's my father-in-law. He said, I'm seeing a baby that's a Gemini. That's my nephew. And then he said, I'm also seeing a little girl who is blind because I'm seeing holes in her eyes. And I have a niece. She's since passed, but at that time she had him. A niece who was legally blind. She had been born with cancer and had aggressive chemotherapy and surgeries when she was 2 years old, 1 year old, 2 years old, and had left her legally blind. So he brought that up. He said, I'm seeing a girl with holes in her skull, which to me means she's blind. So he had a lot of hits before he went down this wrong road of the train. And so I said to my girlfriend as I was driving home, I just wish he had stopped with the train thing. It obviously wasn't for me. And Robert Hansen is a very meticulous reader. Like if the person next to you says, wait a minute, I have steam engine trains, he'll say, no, this is for this person. Like he doesn't. Whereas other people would be like, all right, maybe I'm reading the person next to you. He knows who he's reading. He's right on the, very talented that way. So anyway, that was what I thought was a mixed, I'll say, reading. He obviously was very talented, but had missed the boat on that. That was on a Wednesday. I think it was a Monday or a Wednesday in January. And then that following weekend, I visited my parents. They live very close to me, and I visit them every weekend. And I'm sitting and I'm telling them, I had already turned them on to the whole thing, Afterlife thing. And I'm telling them about this experience. And I'm saying, the only thing is he brought up this train thing. And I went through the whole thing that he was insisting that there's like trains, Lionel trains, and he saw somebody holding trains and blah, blah, blah. And my father says, what? And I was like, and I say it again. And my father says, that's so odd. Last week, I was in the basement, cleaning out the basement, and I found your brother's train set, Lionel trains, from when he was growing up. And I opened the box, and I was holding the trains in my hand, and I was trying to figure out, do I throw them out or keep them? And I just sat there like, oh my God. So when people say, well, maybe they're reading your mind. Well, they couldn't have read my mind. I didn't even know this, So my father then says to me, so what are you telling me? And I'm like, I don't know. And he said, are you telling me someone was in the basement watching me? And I was like, Dad, I honestly don't know what I'm telling you. I don't know what I'm telling you. I mean, now I understand. Now, after years of research, I understand that, yes, the spirits were right there. And probably it was my dear uncle, my father and my uncle so close, or maybe my grandparents on my father's side, that were going to try and break through in that reading if I had just opened myself up to that Lionel Train reading. But I had shut it down because it made absolutely no sense to me. But that was another amazing piece of information, because here the other side specifically had me experience that so that I would understand that sometimes the messages aren't from me. They're not for the person it's being delivered to, in all walks of life. Just like that book to the security guard, I was getting pulled. That message was not from me. I was the conduit. And it was the same in this situation. I was the conduit to basically help my father understand that, yes, there's something more than we see here and feel here. So, yeah, the next trajectory was a lot of those kinds of experiences with little golden nuggets.
Like showing.
Yeah, showing they're around. And maybe there was a reading if I had delved into it a little bit more. I think there was a reading. What I ended up doing after that is taking my father and mother to a Robert Hansen group of 50, because I wanted them to see him in action. And my uncle, who's my father's dear brother, who was deceased, came through in flying colors for my father at that reading. So I wonder if I had gone down that Lionel Train road or whatever, maybe my uncle was trying to come through and say hello to my father. But the bottom line is, it opened my father up to, wow, something else is going on here. I can't believe that you're saying this to me. The same way I couldn't believe the security guard said her mother just died. I was just like, I can't believe that I'm saying this to you either, Dad. I really can't,
And then people will be like, well, as your dad said, what's going on? I mean, we don't really know. I mean, we can make assessments by putting together everything that happened, like big pieces of the puzzle. But I think there's a part of it we just, in our three-dimensional earth material experience, just can't understand. Just like we can't really wrap our minds around the concept of infinity, for example.
And two things. And I think we're not supposed to know, because if we came here on Earth to achieve a purpose, it may not be a grand purpose, maybe a little purpose, maybe a purpose that has to do with somebody other than us, or maybe a series of purposes, maybe a grand purpose, but we come here to achieve a purpose. And if we really know everything about the other side and what things are about, we will be very distracted from probably achieving our purpose. So I think that we're not supposed to know it. And in terms of infinity, and you had mentioned it before with Einstein's and time travel, I just want to bring up this concept because I also have it in my book, and I think it was another eye-opening experience for me. When there's a lot of discussion about how the other side, time doesn't matter. Time is different than it is here. Time is a man-made thing. And I actually think that there's a very good example or explanation of how people can understand that. And it actually has to do with Einstein's theory of relativity, which is basically that we can only relate to what we can relate to, which gets back to why we only know what we know here. We can only relate to what we can relate to. We can't relate to what we can't relate to, like the other side. But having said that, this I think is a way to understand infinity, or understand that time has no or less meaning on the other side. When you are, a year is always a year. 365 days is always a year. It's always 365 days, the same number of days, same number of hours, same number of months. It's a year. When you are 10 years old, 1 year is 10% of your life. So it means a lot, because it's 10% of your life, and you can only relate to the other 9 years. You can't relate to your future. You can only relate to the other 9 years. It's 10% of your life. When you turn 50, a year is still a year. But now it's 2% of your life. So it seems like a year is of less importance. It's of less dimension because you now can relate to 49 other years, even though a year is always a year. So here you have, in our own lifetime, you have the ability to understand how time has a varying meaning within our lifetime. So when people say, geez, as I get older, I feel like time's going faster. Times are, a year is passing more quickly. It is. That's absolutely true. Because although a year is only a year, because of Einstein's theory of relativity, you can only relate to what you can relate to. And so a year at 50 is of less dimension and less value than a year at 10 years old. And a year at 90 is even less. Now you go into the other side, and there are thousands of years. So it's not that there's no time. It's just that time is so infinitesimal. It's so teeny that it's meaningless. Because now a span of time, a year, which is still a year, is one of thousands to you. And you can relate to so much more because you're now your soul. You're not in the human mind of things. It's your soul. And so a portion of time, I'll say, I know it's a man-made concept, but a portion of time is almost meaningless because your soul has many more measurements of time than you have while you're on Earth. And if you need to grab it conceptually, just relate it back to Earth. 1 year at 10 years old is very different than 1 year at 50, one year at 90. It's the same concept, but just taken to the soul level.
And that makes so much sense because after you pass, the theory, and more than the theory, the evidence shows, that we live multiple lives. And when you cross over, you suddenly are able to access all of those. And so, your loved one, let's say you're a parent and you passed when your kid was like 40 or 50, and they have another 40, 50 years left here. Let's say they're fortunate and get to grow elderly, and you look and you're like, yeah, 50 years. Like to us, for many of us, that's a lifetime.
Right.
Some of us it's half a life, and some of us it's more than our lifetime, it varies. So 50 years is like, yeah, that's probably like after you pass, 50 years is nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, I even remember 10 years old, not only was a year was eternity, just eternity, but even a month felt so long.
Right.
No, I look back at memories that feel like they went on forever, and I'm like, that was 2 weeks. What? That felt like so long in my life, and that is a long time in your life at 10. Even 2 weeks is a long time.
Because it's basically the theory of relativity. We can only relate to what we can relate to, and whether it's time or whether it's life on Earth versus not having life on Earth versus the afterlife, you can only relate to what you can relate to. It's Einstein's theory of relativity. The other way I explain this to people, and again, that's one of the things that I think I've been able to accomplish through, not only with the book, but even in my work life. I'm sometimes able to take very elusive topics and make them very practical for people. So another example that I give about that kind of sort of relativity concept, and even how the souls look at us and how we look at Earth when we're on the other side, is I say, everybody can envision in this life a 5-year-old who's a 4-year-old begging for a candy bar. I want a candy bar. I want a candy bar for breakfast. I want a candy bar for breakfast. And maybe you as a parent are saying, no, I'm not going to give you a candy bar for breakfast. And the kid melts down, has a huge temper tantrum and about whatever, a toy, a candy bar, whatever. But everybody can envision a kid melting down on something that you as an adult would think is meaningless. And you think to yourself, this is ridiculous. I'll give this kid a candy bar after lunch. He's going to have 500 candy bars his whole life. He's going to get old. He's going to get a job. He's going to give back to the, community. He's going to fall in and out of love. He's going to have deaths. He's going to have births in his life. This candy bar means nothing. It means nothing. Yet you empathize because the kid is screaming and crying on the ground and feels absolutely horrible. And that's how the other side looks at us.
When we're devastated over a loss, things that really are significant to, adults with perspective, a loss of a loved one. I mean, that's the most devastating. An illness, loss of physical abilities, like people who've gotten chronic illness. I mean, those are devastating things. Loss of a divorce.
To them, that's our candy bar. Because on the other side, there's so much more. There's just so much more. It's not because it's not really about here. It's about doing what we have to do here so that when we get back to the other side, it's like, high five, you did what you had to do. You accomplished your purpose. That's what we're here for. So that's also like that relativity and perception that basically a candy bar to a 5-year-old is not a candy bar to an adult, and a loss of even a loved one to an adult is not the same thing as it is to a soul, because the soul knows you're going to be back here soon enough, because time is very different.
I think I've often been like, why isn't this clearer to us? But in another sense, if we completely understood this, life would be so meaningless. Look at being 6 years old or 5 years old. It's nice to have some perspective, but I wouldn't want to have the perspective I have now. You wouldn't enjoy anything about being 5. You couldn't make friends. You couldn't enjoy a play date. You couldn't enjoy a toy. Everything you'd be like, who cares? Like, it would be a very empty life.
That is a great point, Liz.
You just wouldn't experience anything. I wouldn't care about work. I'd be like, why do I even get out of bed? This is so boring and meaningless. And it'd be actually a horrible life to have that level of perspective.
Such a great thought, Liz. You're absolutely right. And that's why, we are intentionally born with these kinds of, blinders on, that only allow us to grow perception as we grow. But you're absolutely right. What a great point.
Yeah, I'd never quite thought of it that way. I had thought some about the blinders of past life memories. It seems like a lot more people I've talked to have had little flashes that maybe could be a past life.
Wow.
I know I had a weird thing can share in a second, but the kids that have the really strong memories, they're so unhappy. They're so in grief.
Yeah.
That's the thing too. That's why it's like not supposed to be maybe something that you cope with, because these aren't kids that just have little flashes of memories. The ones that are studied and written about, they died as some of them as children, and they miss their other parents. Imagine, there they were 8 years old, and let's say they died in a tragedy, and they have these new parents who maybe they love and they're wonderful parents. But, if I was some horrible tragedy had happened, I'd lost my parents as a little kid and was adopted by other loving parents, I would still miss my parents.
Right.
And they seem to have that level. Or some grew up to be adults and suddenly, died elderly, and they miss their children and they miss their spouse, and they're having to live as a child. However fascinating scientifically now, I'm like, I wish I had that level of memories. How sad. I would miss, there you are suddenly, and you don't have all these people that you just love more than anything, your family, and you're in a new family. It's just, there's a reason, it's, my guess is kids that have that level of memory is it's a glitch, it's not quote unquote supposed to be that way.
Or it is supposed to be that way just for other people. Like, in other words, people come here sometimes and their purpose is not for themselves. So sometimes they come here almost to sacrifice their own happiness or for someone else's knowledge and purpose. So it's people like that, who, like that young boy that remembers himself as a fighter pilot.
James Leininger. Yeah, if anyone wants to read about it, Jim Tucker writes beautifully about it.
Unbelievable. But he may be here it's such an unbelievable evidential story that he's here to open people's eyes, even though his childhood may have been longing for his past life, and may have had, not, he may have not have had the oblivious, happy childhood that other people had. Look at all the people he's touched.
It's true. And he reaches a scientific mind more than anyone spiritual could.
So sometimes their purpose is not for people's purpose is not for just for themselves. It's to help, in his case, to help humankind. So, and there's a lot of people, I think, on Earth like that. I think of a lot of, superstars and things like that. Not all of them, of course, but many of them have very tough lives. Yet they bring such a huge amount of comfort or art to, like Vincent van Gogh, he's a perfect example. They brought beautiful art, unbelievable, to the world, yet his life was miserable for him. So his purpose was, in something greater than his own happiness, something different, I'll say, than his own happiness.
Right. And he brings joy to people years later. It's not even, there's some people that bring that joy just during their lifetime. Then, they fade out. Then there's nothing insignificant about that, but they fade out. And then, yeah, someone like Vincent van Gogh, years and years and lifetimes later, still bringing beauty to the world. Yeah, I know I mentioned quickly something I wonder is a past life memory, which I'll share. And I'm curious if you've had anything like this, but I just remember when I was very little, my parents had this floral heating pad. It was like a blue floral heating pad. And I would freak out every time I saw it. And I didn't quite have the linear vocabulary to put it into these words, but it reminded me of dying in a hospital. I'd never been in a hospital aside from when I was born. And then I had a few health problems. So I was there, I had to be in an incubator there for a few days. But, wouldn't have had concrete memories. I wouldn't have understood, but it was this visceral panic when I saw it, and I associated it with hospital gowns. It was visceral and visual because I was under 5, so I wouldn't have known it literally. And I would scream when my parents took it out. I'd have to leave the room. And then I got a little older and I was like, that's so weird. Why was I scared of that thing? Little kids are so funny. And when I started reading this stuff years later, I was like, I wonder, what a weird association. And it did look very medical. I could see making that association now after having hospital trauma of watching my dad, but now I'm like, how would I, 4 years old, how would I have made an association of it as it sort of just felt like hospital gown look and dying and death and trauma and just so weird. I don't know if you have anything like that.
I haven't. Like I said, I'm not that traditional psychic kind of thing. I don't have any flashbacks, or I think I've actually been on guided meditations to do past life transgressions. Is that what it's called?
Regressions with you go to a regression therapist. Yeah, I did that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have not, and I can't get anything really that comes of it. And it's not like I can't meditate like people say when you meditate, you have to get yourself to zero thoughts. I can actually get myself to zero thoughts really easily, really easily. It's not like my mind is racing and I can get myself to zero. It's just, nothing, and I can think of very peaceful thoughts of the beach or the forest, but I just things don't pop in there, So I don't know. I guess they're very blocked by my left analytical brain or something. I don't know.
We probably all come here with different skills and different reasons. And
yeah, true.
Even knowing that about you, it makes me, and especially if I didn't know you and I heard this and then I thought, okay, but you believe all this. It gives it a credibility when, your mind works that way and not prone to maybe what some people stereotype, prone to fantasy, prone to wishful thinking. You don't have that. And that gives, I think, when people of that mindset, this definitely gives it more credibility. Another thing I'm actually want to ask you, because along with Afterlife Evidence, your book also seems to talk about it's not just grief-based, but like finding yourself and finding what you're supposed to do, and how this type of research helps open, or this type of, not just research, but I don't want to say philosophy, this evidence, I guess, opens up people to try to find what they're really meant to do. First of all, quick question. Do you feel your life has changed profoundly or in any ways since studying all this or learning this? And if so, how?
Absolutely. I will say that prior to understanding this, I was definitely more, I'm still very type A, but very much more high strung and very focused on my own life and not my own life, but like my family's life and my friends. I was very insular in my attention. But after understanding this and understanding there's so much more to life, it's become a lot more easy for me to let things roll, to be like, you know, something, this is not going my way today, but there's probably some reason that it's not going my way. So whereas, just as an example, whereas prior to this, if I had gotten a flat tire, as an example, I would have been like, shoot, I'm going to be late. I really would have been upset. Now I feel like, all right, there's some reason that this is happening. I bet you I'm getting a flat now because it's going to save me from being in an accident in a couple of minutes. Or maybe the guy who's going to fix the flat needs a break in his day and needs me to smile at him, or, you know, so whatever. So I just having that total perspective changes everyday occurrences from being sometimes what would have been very stressful to less stressful. So that, I would say, is the biggest change.
You've always been logical. You know, you didn't discover this in like your teens. You were established in your life. How comfortable did you feel, like, quote unquote, coming out to people about this? And how have people been reacting? Because I know that's something I still have an anxiety about. Like, I go on dates and I'm like, well, I kind of write on the side. Like, I bring up my other startups first. They're like, what do you write about? I'm like, neuroscience and singularity and how brains interact. I'm not like, I write about the afterlife. So
That's so funny. You're absolutely right. When I first started learning this, I was at that point CEO and CFO of a very large local medical practice. And I was way too afraid to bring it out, you know, to just talk about it. But there were just occasions where I could see particular people really struggling, individuals struggling with something, the loss of their father or whatever. And I was at the point where I would weigh it in my mind and say, all right, I'm going to take the risk. I have to bring this up because I knew I had some information that would help them. So it was very carefully, you know, I brought it up very carefully when I did. But when I came up with the book, I almost felt like I didn't have a choice. It was very, very mission-based. I felt like this, over the course of these years, I've helped so many people with individual pieces of my knowledge that I have to bring it together. But I will also say that one of the people who claims that I helped her when her father died with some of the words of wisdom I had was my direct boss, who is an extremely high level in this healthcare organization that I'm part of now, Northwell Health. So since she was, I'll say, you know, open to this to some extent, it helped me be comfortable putting it together at this time in my life. So when I put it all together and I was just about to launch it, I, again, sort of got up the bravery to let her and other coworkers know, hey, just so you know, I'm putting a book out, you know, just to see, you know, what the reaction was. And most people, especially I'm in healthcare. Healthcare is a very caring kind of industry. Most people have been really receptive to it. So I've been very, very blessed and fortunate that way.
I've actually noticed the same thing. Like, I've been really nervous to quote unquote come out. And definitely I'm careful about the intro and how I first do it and ease in a little and come from a logical tone. But I still get terrified. And as I said, I still like don't lead with it on dates. But I notice that people get fascinated. I mean, when I go to entrepreneur groups, I always start with, now I have a zero waste startup I'm launching. I mean, I've done startups since very shortly after graduating college. So, but I was like, had normal startups like in fashion, but I notice I lead with my quote unquote normal startup. And then I get into what the fuck and my book and this, because I've made myself a promise I am going to mention it every business thing I go to. 90% of the time, people are like, whoa, wait, back up. What is this stuff? And they all just want to talk about it. And more than any business I've ever worked on, more than businesses other people are talking about, these are smart, logical people. And they're always just have so many questions, and usually like one or two people that initially I'm really intimidated about, because I'm like, oh God, that person seems really successful. Now I have to come out with this weird shit and keep my promise to myself. And they will come up to me after and they're like, hey, can I ask you, I recently had this loss and what do you think of this? And it's the response has opened up, I guess almost like a level of, I don't want to say level exactly intimacy with people, like instant intimacy, but maybe that is it. Like an openness, a curiosity, people coming to you with things that they probably don't initially tell someone they just met. And it's just been the most wonderful reception, even if it's still to this day really scary for me. So
That's true. When I was in that 3 or 4 years understanding the afterlife, I was talking to a lot of people about it. I mean, just hundreds, everybody. And when you bring it up to them, like you said, 90% have stories of their own. And some of them, one coworker of mine who was a consultant, and I bring it up to him, and he said that he and his wife actually saw a vision of his father both at the same time. They both saw the vision. They both looked at each other and said, did you see that? Did you see that? And I was like, oh my God. So like once people start talking about it, so many people have real life stories about it, and it impacts everybody. So it makes sense that most people would be interested,
yeah. And I find those that aren't interested, it's because I mean, this might sound arrogant, but in a way they're scared. Like when I think of myself before, it's like if thinking about death and getting your hopes up when you pretty much assume there's no afterlife, it's too painful, I mean, everyone has something vested in it. So rather than just, some will be like, I'm not interested, but that comes, I think, from almost like a fear, at least, just not wanting to think about it. It's too sad. Like I used to just never think about this stuff because
Yeah, right. I think sometimes you're right. I think it said it's too sad, but sometimes it's also, I mean, sometimes it's fear, but sometimes it's just too sad to bring up. And I think other people don't like to talk about it because they're afraid it's going to jinx them. Like if you speak about death and the afterlife or whatever, something's going to happen to me. Like there's some reason you're bringing it up now, since there's a reason for everything. And now somebody I know is going to die, So they don't, so there's like a lot of reasons that people prefer not to speak about it. And that's fine, because there's plenty of people who like to speak about it. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. And if, I mean, easier said than done, but if someone's going to think you're too weird or don't want to talk to you, I mean, fuck them. I know that's so much easier said than done.
yeah,
And
I
I
know.
definitely have more emotional reactions to it than that, but it's true.
It's true.
Is there anything you've experienced overall that you would say is the number one most mind-blowing thing, unless you've already feel you've answered that you've encountered?
I think there are so many mind-blowing things, so I have answered a lot of them. But what I do like to say to people, because I think it's important, is if there's one thing that people should try to, one thing that I learned when I learned about this afterlife, is if there's one thing that people should try to sort of take to heart and do in their life, it's to drop the feeling, I'll say, associated with the word compare. Because I think that word compare really stops people from living the best life they can live. And it's sometimes people say, well, I don't compare myself to others, but a lot of times you're comparing yourself to yourself. So it can be comparing yourself to others, or it can be comparing yourself to yourself in the past. I used to be this, I used to be that, or comparing yourself to what you want to be. I'm this, but I want to be something better, which maybe I'll be in 10 years or whatever. And that word compare can really hinder you from living your best life here on earth. So that's something I sort of like to just part with, I think.
How can people find you and follow you and read your book? Because I also want to say Annette shared some mind-blowing, fascinating stories, and this is just a little bit of it. There's more in her book, as well as some real wisdoms that I feel she's acquired over the years, that, such as the candy bar analogy, that definitely I've always found when I feel bitter that why did I lose this person? This is the worst thing, because I lost my dad, I lost some animals, and I lost like my main mentor. Annette and I both, she was significant to both of us. And I have so much bitterness some days about that. I'm like, oh, I lost the person that like I felt led to for after losing my dad, and like my rock, like fuck that, seriously. And so I feel like go to the candy bar analogy a lot when I start feeling bitter, and it helps me. So Annette has a lot of wisdoms like that in her book.
Thank you.
I highly recommend
Thank
it.
you.
So yeah, tell people where they
Thank
can
you.
follow you. I'll add it in the show notes too, of course.
Thank you. So I have a website. It's AnnetteMarinaccio.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. And my book is on with my name. And my book, Your Soul Focus, is sold on Amazon. It's on Audible. And it is on Barnes & Noble.
Great. Thank you so much, Annette.
Yeah. Thank you.
To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey-Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?